This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Judge Brett Kavanaugh is now Justice Brett Kavanaugh after the Senate narrowly approved him along a basically party line vote this weekend. We're going to take a look at that vote and what it could mean for the upcoming midterm elections, plus an inside look at the campaign trail as CBN News traveled with Vice President Mike Pence and Christians around the world came together Sunday to prepare for the peace of Jerusalem. All those stories and more are ahead on today's edition of CBN NewsWatch. We begin with Judge Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. Despite weeks of sexual assault allegations and protests, Kavanaugh will take his place on the United States Supreme Court. The final vote confirming Kavanaugh came Saturday after an FBI investigation found nothing to support the charges against him. Democrats said the investigation didn't go far enough, but Republicans said Democrats were going to complain no matter what happened. Kavanaugh's confirmation came down to a handful of senators. The pivotal vote, Susan Collins of Maine. And she said she first thought Kavanaugh should withdraw after the hearing Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony in the morning of the historic Senate Judiciary Committee hearing a week and a half ago, actually. Then his strong response that afternoon changed her mind.
But then when he came back with such a forceful denial and the anger and anguish that he showed, and then the lack of corroboration, led me back to the fundamental issues that are fundamental to our legal system, a presumption of innocence.
Washington correspondent Amber Strong is here now to talk more about that crucial vote and the fallout from Kavanaugh's confirmation. So, Amber, what kind of backlash is Collins facing for her decision?
So a couple of activist groups, the Maine's People Alliance, set up this website and they said if she votes no against Kavanaugh, then any money that's donated, we're going to send back to people. It was a crowdfunding website. But if she votes yes, then all of this money is going to go to her 2020 challenger. And when she voted yes, there were so many people responding that the website crashed. And as of this morning, they had $3.5 million set to go to her 2020 challenger.
So what about other senators? Could several Democrats be in trouble in next month's midterms?
One Democrat that I am watching is Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Joe Manchin was the one Democrat who actually voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, went against party lines, but then Mitch McConnell came out this weekend and said, yeah, thank you for your vote, but you're still a Democrat and we want to see you gone. So I'm not sure where he's winning favors on a national scale. However, he is in a red state. So it may be winning some favors with the voters there in West Virginia. He is solidly ahead of the polls, but we'll see where that goes after this weekend.
Watch indeed. How are both sides saying this will impact the November elections? Will this energize turnout on both sides in the House races as well as the Senate?
Oh, definitely. Both sides are using this as kind of a galvanizing moment. President Trump said that this is energizing the base. Mitch McConnell said this is the one thing that actually got the party excited, that Republicans who watched Brett Kavanaugh kind of be dragged through this confirmation process are angry, and they're going to show up to the polls and vote accordingly. On the flip side, Democrats are saying women whose voices weren't necessarily heard, or they're saying their voices weren't heard, are going to be angry and are going to show up and vote accordingly as well.
All right. It'll certainly be an election to watch. Amber Strong, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ephraim.
Kavanaugh's confirmation marked the end of arguably the most bitter Supreme Court battle in American history. One key reason, some people believe the 9 justices of the High Court have become the most powerful people in the nation's government. But why are they so important? Paul Strand explains.
Lawmakers pass the laws, but it's the court that decides whether they're constitutional and can stand. The executive branch executes those laws, but the court decides whether it's doing it constitutionally. And the only way to go over its head is to amend the Constitution, which takes 3/4 of the states. The court has the power of life and death. Rare is the execution without a justice signing off on it. And if any citizen can get their case before the court, it can literally change the course of the nation. Take Roe v. Wade, where the justices suddenly found in the 14th Amendment right to privacy, a woman can abort her baby. 60 million abortions followed. Or gay marriage. It was illegal in almost all the states, except with one ruling, the court legalized it nationwide. It's because of this kind of power that the leanings of a new and ninth justice are so crucial, because right now the court's divided, 4 leaning liberal, 4 leaning conservative. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Investigators are looking into what is now the country's worst transportation accident in nearly a decade, one which killed 20 people. A limo carrying a group of 18 people in New York crashed, killing everyone inside and 2 pedestrians. Investigators say the limousine blew a stop sign, plowed through an intersection, and slammed into an SUV that was parked at a restaurant. The National Transportation Safety Board has not commented on the limo's speed or if the limo's passengers were wearing seatbelts.
We will not be determining the cause of the crash while we are on scene. That will come at a later date, nor will we be speculating on any cause of the crash.
Family members say the group was celebrating a surprise 30th birthday party. Here's a look now at some of the other major stories we're following for you today in the CBN Newsroom. Florida's governor has declared a state of emergency ahead of Tropical Storm Michael. The storm is supposed to make landfall this week as a Category 2 hurricane with winds of up to 100 miles an hour. The governor also activated 500 members of the Florida National Guard ahead of the storm. No evacuations have been ordered just yet, but forecasters advise residents along the coast to monitor the storm's progress. At least a dozen people have been killed after a strong earthquake struck Haiti. The U.S. Geological Survey says a 5.9 magnitude earthquake hit, and not long after that, a 5.2 aftershock rattled northern Haiti. More than 150 people have been injured. Emergency authorities say victims are without electricity, without homes, and hospitals have become overcrowded. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made progress Sunday toward North Korea's denuclearization. Pompeo's visit with Kim Jong-un in South Korea was the third stop of a 4-leg trip that began in Japan and ends in China Monday. Little details were given after his talks with Kim Jong-un, and Pompeo did not say if there will be a second summit between Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump. You can learn more about these stories throughout the day and others at cbnnews.com. A vote on a constitutional amendment to protect traditional marriage may have been defeated in Romania. The measure would have made it harder to legalize same-sex marriage, which is already forbidden by the statute in Romania. But turnout was low, and so the vote may not count. Turnout was estimated at under 20% a couple of hours before the polls closed in the 2-day vote, and a referendum needs 30% to be valid. We spoke with Tudor Perton of Alpha Omega Television before the vote about why churches supported the measure.
We want to have a small change in the constitution of Romania. Until now, the constitution defined the family as a free will marriage between spouses. And we want to have a small change that the marriage is a union between a man and a woman. This is a small change, but with big significance. Looking in the future, already it's a big pressure over our kids in our schools to introduce LGBT agenda, education, gender ideology. So we want to preserve and to avoid future involvement of LGBT in our nation. And in fact, we want to be the same side with God in our nation.
Final results are expected later. Up next, Sunday marked the annual day of prayer for the peace of Jerusalem, and we're going to show you how tens of millions of Christians celebrated that day in 170 countries around the world. We'll have that story and so much more when we come back. Israeli security forces are still searching for the Palestinian terrorist who murdered 2 Israelis Sunday. The 29-year-old mother of 1 and 35-year-old father of 3 were shot as they worked in the Barkan industrial zone near the city of Ariel. The 23-year-old terrorist was caught on security cameras running from the scene. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the attack as severe and said the murderer would be brought to justice. Israeli Knesset member Michael Oren told CBN News there's only one way to describe that attack.
What we're talking about here is evil. I'm not just talking about terrorism. Terrorism is sort of a neutral word, isn't it? It doesn't have a moral quality to it. What we're talking about are evil people, and evil exists in the world. I believe it. I've always deeply believed it. I've experienced myself. I've confronted evil, and we have to fight it.
For 35 years, the industrial zone has been a model of coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. More than 3,000 Palestinians work there with Israelis each day. This is the first attack ever of its kind in that location. An estimated 90 million Christians from around the world celebrated the annual Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem Sunday, praying in more than 170 countries around the world. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us this look at the central prayer event in Israel's capital.
Thousands of Christians from around the world gathered together with Christian and Jewish leaders at the promenade overlooking the old city of Jerusalem to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, sing, dance, and worship the God of Israel.
So the Day of Prayer for the Peace of Jerusalem in Jerusalem was inaugurated in 2005.
The event is celebrated the first Sunday of October each year. It brings together Jews and Christians to follow the biblical injunction in Psalm 122:6. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Robert Stearns from Eagle's Wings Ministry is head organizer of the event.
Jerusalem is the root of our faith. Jerusalem, in a sense, is the city of both our spiritual birth and of our future spiritual hope.
Organizers say there are many reasons to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Now, the Jewish people believe the reason he asks Jews and Christians to pray for the peace of Jerusalem is because he always wants us to take the issue of Jerusalem and keep it close to our heart.
We need to understand that we are grafted into this incredible place called Israel, and so our goal is to somehow bring us back to biblical Christianity and blessing this incredible place.
Popular Christian artists like Eddie James and Misty Edwards led the worship. Jewish leaders thanked Christians for their support, and Knesset member Michael Oren encouraged Christians to stand up for the Jewish state.
I mentioned in my speech here that there are many international bodies who would deny the Jewish connection to this city, our common history, our common traditions, and we have to unite together. Yeah, we may have different ways of expressing our faith, but it's the same faith, and it's the same history. And anybody who would deny that there was a Jewish temple up there is denying Jesus, is denying the New Testament.
Keynote speaker Rabbi Mark Schneier said, considering the history of Christian persecution of the Jews, it's a miracle that Jews and Christians can come together.
We're living in miraculous times, and one of those miracles is the reconciliation between our two faith communities. And I believe that we're also celebrating that miracle here today.
Not pretending that we don't have theological differences, because we do. We're divided regarding the identity of the Messiah, but we are united in believing and praying for the coming of Messiah soon and quickly in our day.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, with the midterm elections coming up in less than a month, the Trump administration is making a strong push to keep control of the House and Senate. And CBN News traveled with the vice president on the campaign trail. We're going to have that story when we come back. The midterms are less than a month away, and the Trump administration is focused on keeping control of the Capitol. Part of the strategy involves a busy campaign schedule for both the president and vice president. CBN's David Brody and Jenna Browder traveled with the vice president on Air Force Two to see what lies ahead.
Vice President Mike Pence on the road again. Crisscrossing the country, campaigning for Republican candidates in the days leading up to November's midterms. And this time, we're right there with him, on board Air Force Two, heading to Michigan. The Senate candidate he's stumping for, John James, a combat veteran and businessman. You have been out on the campaign trail stumping for candidates. Do you think Republicans will keep control of the House and Senate?
I really do. The president and I are very confident that if we get out and tell the story of the progress that we're making in this country, progress that's created nearly 4 million jobs, rebuild our military, has America standing tall in the world again, being respected again. We tell that story all across this country. We're going to make history in 2018 just the way we made history in 2016 by re-electing and expanding Republican majorities on Capitol Hill.
Out of the 35 Senate races, 9 are toss-ups. That's about 25%. In the House, 43 of 435 races are toss-ups, about 10%. In other words, it's going to be close, and history is against them. Typically, the president's party loses seats in his first term.
Part of the reason why we're traveling so much across the country, and the reason why we had an opportunity to talk to some of the great evangelical leaders in the country, is to make sure that the American people know that's the choice.
President Trump echoes that sentiment and ruffled more than a few feathers when he said there would be violence if Democrats take control of Congress. He made the comment at a White House dinner for evangelicals, which Pence was at.
Well, what I heard the president say was that if the Democrats take over the Congress, that their goal is to turn back everything that we've done for the American people.
Well, because he did mention Antifa and some of these leftist groups.
Well, sure.
So what's the concern there about some of these groups?
Well, obviously we condemn any examples of violence on the streets of this country. Zero tolerance for any violence against Americans.
Dan, when it comes to impeaching the president,
there's a lot of talk about impeachment if Democrats do take control of the House. Do you think Nancy Pelosi is already plotting an impeachment strategy?
Well, they're all talking about it, and so I take them at their word, even though some of them have decided to not talk about that quite so much.
One thing that's for sure, the fight over the control of Congress is going to get nasty. And Pence is already feeling some of it personally with a new book out that attacks his faith.
The Bible says, count it all joy when you endure trials of many kinds. And anytime I'm criticized for my belief in Jesus Christ, I just breathe a prayer of praise.
Republicans hope to be able to breathe their own sigh of relief this fall. Of course, they have to fend off the so-called blue wave some are predicting. Aboard Air Force Two, the vice president remains hard at work, determined to not let that happen. Reporting from Air Force Two, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Coming up, Hurricane Florence is long gone, but its damage is still with us. We're going to show you how Operation Blessing has been working to help people recovering from the onslaught of Florence in North Carolina when we come back. Hurricane Florence devastated New Bern, North Carolina. The cost, $100 million and counting. More than 4,300 homes were damaged. Homes like Julia McGriff's. Julia tried to salvage what belongings she could, but after a few days, exposure to the mold put Julia in the hospital. That's when Operation Blessing came to her rescue.
When Julia McGriff returned to New Bern, North Carolina after Hurricane Florence, she didn't realize how much damage had been done to her home.
My thought was my house has survived. I could mop up the floors, I could wash down things, and I could stay here.
But she couldn't. The 2 to 3 feet of floodwater had ruined almost everything she owned.
The refrigerator, the stove, my deep freezer, it stopped working completely. Drywall has to be removed. Cabinets has to be removed, the bottom cabinets. I was looking at things that I thought I could keep, and come to find out, even if it dry out, the mold will still be there.
She salvaged a few things and put them in storage. After just a few days, the mold actually landed Julia in the hospital with breathing trouble.
I just wanted to holler and scream.
When she heard about Operation Blessing's disaster relief efforts, and we sent a team out to help, things started to change.
Like a cabaret. They come in ready to work, and they did.
We moved cabinets, took out drywall, and got everything ready for Julia's house to be dried out, so she can eventually move back home without worrying about mold or breathing problems.
It's like kind of a burden been lifted. It just gave me relief. Gave me some relief and happiness, because things are on the way to getting back on track.
Julia wants to make sure others get the same help she got.
Continue your donations, because it is really needed to keep Operation Blessing working, because they don't only do this for us, they do it for every disaster. And the people that's in the disaster really needs that. Thank you all, and thank God for you.
Thank God for you. Time now for your Monday motivation. And I've got 3 words for you to jumpstart the new week. They are submit, submerge, and sublime. Consider this formula. If you will submit yourself to God, submerge yourself in His Word and in His will, you can watch His sublime blessings emerge in your life. It's a simple formula, but it will produce some amazing results. With that word, I encourage you to make this a marvelous Monday. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And we'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a marvelous Monday. For many of you, the news continues in just a little bit with the second half hour of CBN NewsWatch. Thanks for watching.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
Thank you so much for joining us for this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Today, Republican Senator Susan Collins speaks out about her pivotal vote approving Judge Brett Kavanaugh for the U.S. Supreme Court. Plus, Christian pastors in Canada rallied together to stop sexual orientation gender classes in schools. And it's the case of the missing manuscript. Find out how an ancient document wound up half a way around the world. All that and more in the second half hour of CBN NewsWatch. We begin with Judge Brett Kavanaugh. He takes his place on the United States Supreme Court following weeks of protest and debate over sexual assault allegations. The final confirmation vote came Saturday after the FBI's latest investigation found nothing to support the charges against him. Democrats said the investigation did not go far enough, but Republicans said Democrats were going to complain no matter what happened. Kavanaugh's confirmation came down to a handful of senators. The pivotal vote, Susan Collins of Maine. She said she first thought Kavanaugh should withdraw after the hearing of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony. But then his strong response changed her mind.
But then when he came back with such a forceful denial and the anger and anguish that he showed, and then the lack of corroboration led me back to the fundamental issues that are fundamental to our legal system, a presumption of innocence.
I want to turn now to New York, where investigators are looking into what is now the country's worst transportation accident in nearly a decade. It killed 20 people. A limousine carrying 18 people in New York crashed, killing everyone inside and 2 pedestrians. Investigators say it blew through a stop sign, plowed through an intersection, and then slammed into an SUV that was parked outside a restaurant. The National Transportation Safety Board has not commented on the limo's speed or if the limo passengers were wearing their seatbelts.
We will not be determining the cause of the crash while we are on scene. That will come at a later date, nor will we be speculating on any cause of the crash.
Family members say the group was celebrating a surprise 30th birthday. Here now is a quick look at some of the other major stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. Florida's governor has declared a state of emergency ahead of Tropical Storm Michael. The storm is supposed to make landfall this week as a Category 2 hurricane with winds of up to 100 miles an hour. The governor also activated 500 members of the Florida National Guard ahead of the storm. No evacuations have been ordered just yet, but forecasters advise residents along the coast to monitor the storm's progress. At least a dozen people have been killed after a strong earthquake struck in Haiti. The U.S. Geological Survey says a 5.9 magnitude earthquake hit, and not long after that, a 5.2 aftershock rattled northern Haiti. More than 150 people have been injured. Emergency officials say victims are without electricity. Homes and hospitals have become overcrowded. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made progress Sunday toward North Korea's denuclearization. Pompeo's visit with Kim Jong-un is in South Korea and was the third stop of a 4-leg trip that began in Japan and ends in China Monday. Little details were given after his talks with Kim Jong-un, and Pompeo did not say if there'll be a second summit between Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump. Israeli security forces are still searching for the Palestinian terrorist who murdered 2 Israelis on Sunday. The 29-year-old mother of 1 and 35-year-old father of 3 were shot as they worked in Barkan Industrial Zone near the city of Ariel. The 23-year-old terrorist was caught on security cameras running from the scene. You see it there. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the attack as severe and said the murderer would be brought to justice. Israeli Knesset member Michael Oren told CBN News there's only one way to describe that attack.
What we're talking about here is evil. I'm just talking about terrorism. Terrorism is sort of a neutral word, isn't it? It doesn't have a moral quality to it. But what we're talking about are evil people, and evil exists in the world. I believe it. I've always deeply believed it. I've experienced myself. I've confronted evil, and we have to fight it.
For 35 years, the industrial zone has been a model of coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. More than 3,000 Palestinians work there with Israelis each day. This is the first attack ever of its kind in that location. In Canada, a historic event, more than 330 Christian pastors say no to SOGI. SOGI stands for the Sexual Orientation Gender Identification Curriculum. It is being taught in Canada's public schools. Christian leaders say it is harming children and teaching unbiblical views on sexuality. The pastors recently came out against it by signing what they call the West Coast Christian Accord,
which in 14 articles provides a biblical statement on the supremacy of Christ, the authority of Scripture, salvation, marriage, sexual orientation, and gender identity.
We will not remain silent as children are brainwashed to reject heterosexuality and embrace gender fluidity, homosexuality, bisexuality, and other forms of sexual behaviors.
We are opposed to students being taught lifestyles that the Bible calls sin.
Pastors say SOGI confuses young children by forcing them to choose a gender when they already have one. The pastors are asking the BC Minister of Education to stop the use of all SOGI-related resources inside schools. Turn now to socialist Venezuela. The country's massive economic and social problems are taking a heavy toll on the country's health services, and their situation in the country's hospitals is heartbreaking. Aldil Hurd is following this story.
Venezuela's economic meltdown has taken a terrible toll on the nation's health services. And in Venezuelan hospitals, the situation is especially heartbreaking. At San Cristobal Hospital in Táchira State, only emergency cases are being admitted, and people have to buy their own medicines, bandages, and gloves. Some patients are forced to wait in stairwells for treatment that is not coming. This patient, Gloria, needs a metal pin for her leg, but she may wait up to 3 months. Because of a shortage of nurses, many patients in the hospital are being cared for by their relatives. Many of the medical personnel have left the hospital because they were unable to survive on the minimum wage they were getting, and those who are left are working for almost nothing.
Everything here is so sad. I can not help them because they need help. There is nobody here.
The hospital is almost bankrupt by the worsening economic situation in Venezuela, and parts have had to be boarded up due to lack of supplies. This 7-year-old patient has a brain tumor. There is no cancer treatment available in the country, and she is cared for by her mother, who says, "Because she's my daughter, I have to support her and do everything I can to help her. We've been here for 2 months. This boy needs antibiotics for a serious bowel problem, but they simply aren't available." His father describes the situation as a nightmare. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, it's the case of the missing manuscript. How did an ancient document wind up half a way around the world in Washington, D.C.? We're going to take a look at how the Museum of the Bible is trying to crack an international whodunit. The story's next. Our next story might sound like something ripped from the pages of an international mystery thriller. An ancient biblical manuscript was recently discovered at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, a manuscript that had been missing for years from Greece. Ben Kennedy brings us this story.
The mystery began when the University of Athens discovered their 10th-century-old manuscript had been stolen. Then it turns up across the Atlantic right here in D.C.
The manuscript is right here in the front.
And the big question remains, how did this 1,000-year-old document become a display at the Museum of the Bible? Problem solved. We know where it's at. How did it leave the University of Athens?
Well, this is the mystery.
Okay, so it continues.
Yeah, it continues.
The manuscript dates back to the 1100s when a monk copied the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Odds are the book was used at a Greek Orthodox church or monastery. Fast forward some 800 years when it was donated to the University of Athens and then went missing sometime in 1991.
They had put this manuscript on display beginning in 1987 at a sort of an anniversary of the founding of the university, and they loaned it to the University Museum from the University Library, along with 3 other manuscripts. 4 years later, they got a note from the museum registrars that, well, we have 3 of your manuscripts and we're just letting you know. They didn't say anything about the 4th manuscript not being there.
From that point, the relic was basically MIA.
The word is stolen, right? It was taken without permission. Somebody stole it. It's pretty easy to slip something like this into a briefcase or a bag. There's no, detector tracking system on it, so it's unfortunately easy to remove.
Documents reveal it first resurfaced at an auction in 1998. Then it passed through a handful of private collectors before being donated to the Museum of the Bible in 2014. No one knew the truth because of tampering and a missing page.
That page may have had some identifying marks, so it looks like someone intentionally tried to hide the identity of the manuscript.
Meanwhile, the University of Athens did some digging and discovered its missing property could be in America.
One of our scholars associated with us, Dr. Tommy Wasserman, had posted information about the manuscript on a New Testament database, and that's where the university found the information and thought, well, this looks kind of similar to ours, and let's talk about this.
That talk led to a breakthrough. And now the newly found document has been returned home.
These are the inheritance of all of humanity, right? The history of the Bible and how it's been preserved.
And for being more than 1,000 years old, it's in pretty good shape.
Yes, it's parchment, which as long as it's properly cared for, will be preserved for a very long time.
Now the manuscript was packed up and shipped back to Greece on October 1st. And as you can imagine, the university was tracking it closely as it made its way home. Before it returned to the rightful owner, the rare manuscript was on display at the Museum of the Bible, where thousands got to learn the story and see this piece of biblical history firsthand. As for who took it, well, that part remains a mystery, one that scholars hope to solve soon. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Up next, the pressure to create a dream wedding. See how the more money couples spend on their weddings, the more likely they'll end up divorced. The story's coming up today. These days, couples are spending nearly twice as much as they did on weddings 10 years ago. It is a trend some money experts and even pastors find troubling. Heather Sells breaks down the reasons why an expensive wedding may not be the best way to start a marriage.
For most brides, it starts with this: thousands of pictures and ideas to help plan the perfect wedding.
It's definitely a lot of pressure.
Corey Bateman got married last summer and says she was well aware of the challenge in meeting expectations set by social media.
I think weddings are just a much bigger deal than they ever used to be. It's not as much as, oh, it's 2 people getting married. It's what kind of party are you going to throw?
And Bateman isn't alone in her feelings.
More than 1/3 of couples feel pressure from the media to have that perfect wedding. It may be why the average bride and groom spent $28,000 compared to just $16,000 10 years ago.
Or why they delay walking down the aisle.
I am seeing engagements being greatly prolonged. I'm seeing people searching for the perfect venue, for the perfect time of year, for the perfect colors.
Pastor Benjamin Verbachek has written about the pressures couples face to create what he calls the Pinterest dream wedding. It's a theme that other pastors have picked up on as well. The goal, help Christian couples refocus and think about the ultimate purpose of their wedding and marriage.
So culturally, I think right now we're at a place where our identity is not so much looking upward to God and who He says we are in the gospel, the good news that we're His sons and daughters in Christ, but rather who we posture ourselves as in social media.
And research helps back up the idea of a frugal wedding. Economists have found couples going the $20,000 or more route divorce more than those who spend less than $10,000. If you want to go big, social scientists recommend going with more family and friends, not necessarily more money. They believe it can increase your chance of a happy marriage. Sociologist Brad Wilcox calls it the big fat Greek wedding factor.
So having your wedding, in a relatively cheap venue, maybe a church hall, for instance, or something else, but with a lot of your friends and family members there, seems to be the formula when it comes to the ceremony itself for greater marital quality.
Nikki Crystal and her fiancé followed this so-called formula without knowing it existed.
I'm one of 5. My mom is one of 6. Most of my family lives close by, and so I grew up with just a lot of people around, and I couldn't imagine having something small.
Crystal, however, also faced a tight budget.
My parents helped a lot, and they helped where they could, but I also didn't want to be in debt after I got married.
So the couple cut corners. They picked a cheap venue, hired a photographer for just half a day, and bought wholesale flowers. That kind of thrifty thinking also inspired Casey Capra, who says her mom taught her about stewardship. Together, they made table centerpieces and other decorations.
There was a lot of satisfaction in looking back at things you had created and done and known that you hadn't even spent a lot of money on it.
For their large wedding, Corey Bateman and her fiancé used their network of friends and family to help keep costs down while creating memories. Thanks to volunteers, they didn't have to hire musicians, a florist, or a wedding planner.
Even after the whole day, I had people say to me, we really loved how your wedding was just so family oriented. I was like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm like, well, we just, everyone was involved. It just seemed like there were a lot of people that care about you guys, that helped, and that were having, just a great time and wanted to be a part.
That community support, says Wilcox, can extend beyond the wedding day and help the couple weather the seasons of life. In the meantime, Pastor Benjamin is committed to help steer couples away from the Pinterest perfect event.
I think they're relieved to have someone telling them, hey, you don't have to make it about these things. The value of your wedding is not on how much you spent on it or how many people post on Instagram during the reception. The value is that you love each other, that God loves you, and it was a Christian wedding.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
One Texas church recently performed some special wedding ceremonies for cohabitating couples. Our Heather Sells spoke with the pastor about how it all started with just a sermon.
A church in Carrollton, Texas recently performed some special wedding ceremonies for cohabitating couples. Here to tell us more is Pastor Pete Briscoe with Bent Tree Bible Fellowship. Pastor, thanks a lot for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Heather.
Tell us about these ceremonies that you performed. What was the motivation?
Yeah, so we did, last Saturday, we did 7 weddings, one after the other, starting at 10 in the morning and going till about 5 in the afternoon. And the motivation was really, I did a sermon on cohabitation and talked about the fact that it was a cheap imitation of the real thing, that God really has 2 great ways to live life in Christ. One is as a single person, one is a married person, but if we're cohabitating, we're missing the benefits of both of those things, and we're settling for something less than what God has for us. And so I wanted to preach this message, and then at the end of it, I didn't want to just say, okay, now go and fix it. I wanted to give people an opportunity to fix it. And so at the end of the service, we just said, hey, here's an offer you can't refuse. If it's time for you to get married, we'll give you a free wedding on Saturday. Come on down.
Wow. How did the couples respond in terms of that? I take it the couples who you just married were ones who came forward after that sermon.
Yes, they were. And the responses were just amazing. There were couples all over the map, age-wise. We had very young couples. We had some couples that were in their 60s, some that have been together for years, some that had 2 or 3 children already, others that had been together just a very short time. But their response was universally grateful. I mean, they were just so happy to be able to do this. Most of them had been having conversations about getting married before the sermon, but when they heard the sermon, they sensed the Spirit saying it's time. And so it was really a special day. We had a ton of fun, and they were all just really grateful.
Tell us about the original motivation behind the sermon. I'm sensing that perhaps you've struggled wondering how to best reach people in your congregation and perhaps outside your congregation who are living together.
Yeah, I mean, the motivation for the sermon, I was doing a series, it was a 4-week series called Awkward, and we talked about 4 topics that are hard to talk about, but we really do need to talk about them. And so cohabitation was one of those topics. And the idea was that a lot of people in our culture, maybe they found Christ a little later in life, and no one ever told them the way that it's supposed to work, the way that it works beautifully when God's in the middle of it. And so I was working on the assumption that we had a number of people in our church that were living together that really didn't know any different, or maybe just hadn't taken the time to obey the Lord in this. And we really wanted to give them an opportunity to be challenged by the Spirit in that and to step into something much better than what they were experiencing. And that's exactly what happened.
That's really wonderful. Going forward, do you think you'll do this again? Have you heard from any other churches that might want to replicate what you've done?
I don't know if we've heard from any churches. I did an interview earlier in the week on Moody Radio and encouraged churches to call our church and ask for Melissa, our wedding coordinator, if they'd like to look at doing something like this. And I haven't had a chance to talk to her, but we'd love to help any churches that would like to do something like this. What we've discovered is a lot of these younger couples, especially, they're in a place financially where they can't afford a wedding, and that's one of the reasons why they don't get married. And so offering a free wedding really can help couples take this step. So we really strongly encourage churches to give it a try.
All right, Pastor Briscoe, that's a very uplifting message. Thanks for your time.
You bet. Thank you, Heather.
Operation Blessing stepped in to help a man in need in El Salvador. Jose Hernandez's life was turned upside down after his leg was amputated and he was forced to find a new way to make a living with only an old rundown wheelchair to get around. Jose started his own business selling candy, but one day his wheelchair collapsed and completely left him lying helplessly on the pavement. Operation Blessing got wind of his situation and decided to reward Jose for his work ethic and resiliency with a brand new wheelchair. Jose said he has Operation Blessing and God to thank for the encouragement to keep going. You can learn more about Operation Blessing by visiting his website, ob.org. Time now for your Monday motivation. I leave you with this lesson I learned this weekend. Troubled waters on the surface become still in the deep. Are you facing a troubled time? Perhaps it's time to go deep. Go deep in prayer, go deep in praise, and go deep in God's presence. Then watch life's troubled waters become still waters. With that word, make this a marvelous Monday. That concludes this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. You can also let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today by emailing us. The email address is newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope we'll see you again right here tomorrow. Bye-bye.